The AIDS crisis was an event that shook the world. It blindsided the people and took everyone by surprise. No one imagined that it would break out into this huge crisis and lead to all the changes that it did. But before we get into an in depth discussion of the AIDS crisis, let's first talk about what the world was like before AIDS crisis. So before the AIDS crisis, the world was watching as Russia and America were engaged in a Cold War. They constantly kept fighting each other and trying to belittle each other and trying to outdo each other in different aspects, technological and military aspects, and they were fighting over which country could accomplish more. These countries were also trying to establish the dominance of their government. Russia was trying to establish communism all over the world, and America was trying to establish capitalism. And a war that resulted from the Cold War between Russia and the USA was the Vietnam War, which began on November 1st, 1955, and ended on April 30th, 1975. And in a manner, Russia won this war. This America took a hard hit from the Vietnam War, and it was still trying to recover from all the lives that they lost and the money that they spent in this war and all the time and energy that they put into this war. During 20 years that led up to the AIDS epidemic, in America, a movement called the hippie movement also began. So in this movement, people started to break away from societal norms and become more free and connect with their roots and become more spiritual and break away from society and what was expected of them. Those were some of the few events and circumstances that led to the state of America's situation in America that it was in when the AIDS crisis happened. So the AIDS crisis began in June 1981. So when AIDS first began to be noticed by doctors, it was noticed in gay men, and it was first thought to be pneumonia, and it primarily showed up only in gay men. So the public and the government and even news channels did not take this seriously and dismissed it as a gay problem. Some people even thought that, oh, since this person is gay, he must have had AIDS because of it. They didn't really seem to care or find out or try to find the real science behind what was causing these issues. The AIDS crisis went unnoticed and lacked attention from the government for so long that the people themselves decided to take matters into their own hands and started to protest for to get the government to pay attention to their issues and help them out. Also during this period, the American public stepped up and took care of AIDS, people who were affected by AIDS. So even though these people knew that it was contagious and there wasn't an exact explanation about how it spread. So since they were unaware of this knowledge, they went in afraid that they might catch AIDS from these infected people, but they still went in and took care of the people who are affected by AIDS. While the American public was doing so much to help the people who were infected with AIDS and fight for these people, the governments dismissed it as a gay plague. In fact, the administration that was in office during this time, President Reagan's administration, treated it like a joke. In fact, during an exchange between Speaks and a journalist, Lester Kinsolving, from 1982, during this period, there had been about 1,000 people who had died from AIDS. So Lester Kinsolving asks, does the president have any reaction to the announcement by the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta that AIDS is now an epidemic in over 600 cases? Larry Speaks responds with, AIDS, I haven't got anything on it. Lester Kinsolving says, over a third of them had died. It's known as gay plague. No, it is. It's a pretty serious thing. 1 in every 3 people that get this have died. And I wonder if the president was aware of this. Larry Speaks says, I don't have it. And then he laughs and then asks, do you? So you see over here in the short interaction, you see that he has, he's simply joking about all these people who've died from AIDS. He doesn't really seem to think that these people who have died from AIDS seem to matter. He, especially since during this time in 1982, it was still considered something that only affected gay people. And since their rights were not established and they were not considered to be proper citizens in a manner that they, like the members of the same sex, they were dismissed. And it is almost ridiculous to see that a member from the administration is joking about so many deaths. Ultimately, the government took action against the AIDS crisis after lots of pressure from the public forced them to do so, and the public was able to do this through the form of protests, which showed their displeasure with the government in the manner that they were treating this major issue that was affecting so many people, and they didn't like how the government was just dismissing it as a gay people problem. During this AIDS crisis, there were many protests that were held by the people. There were even certain organizations that were led by the people, which were not only fighting for justice for the people who were suffering with AIDS, but also for people who were in the LGBTQ community. So out of this crisis, ultimately what happened was not only did the government learn how to manage a medical crisis and take action against it and be able to find a cure, but they were also able to, people who were in the LGBTQ community also got more recognition and more acceptance from the people, though it was still very stigmatized. It was their situation, their circumstances in America improved greatly after the AIDS crisis, after many organizations were opened and they were being listened to. And after the organizations that supported their rights began to open and fight for them, they had more rights in this country, and in a manner it improved their lives a little bit. So that was the AIDS crisis, and now I will be moving on to discuss the Vietnam War and the civil rights, and compare and contrast these two events with the AIDS crisis. So first, I will be talking about the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement occurred in 1861 to 1865. So during this period, the people were trying to desegregate and end discrimination in Black communities and improve lives for Black people. So one thing that was common at a first look, when you even just compare these two, the civil rights movement and AIDS crisis on the surface, was the protests. So in both cases, in both events, the people weren't happy with what the government was doing and the decisions that they were making, and they protested against this. In the civil rights movement, the people were unhappy about the manner that Black people were getting treated and how desegregation was ruining their lives. And in the AIDS crisis, the American public was unhappy with how the government was dealing with the AIDS crisis and how lightly they were taking this issue. So in both cases, protests were used in order to express a public's displeasure and in order to gain what they were fighting for. So this is something that we can see right on the surface. Another thing that is common in both these movements was how a certain group of people, like was being discriminated against or being treated unfairly. So in the case of the civil rights movement, the people who were being treated unfairly was the minority, which was consisted of Black people. So the Black people minority was being treated unfairly by the government, the people, the country in general, and being discriminated against on all fronts. While in the AIDS crisis, the people who were, this wasn't necessarily discrimination, but they were definitely being treated unfairly and not being taken seriously. And this was obviously the LGBTQ community, mostly gay people in this case. So in the civil rights movement, these Black people were being discriminated against. They were being kept segregated from the white people. Even though they were no longer slaves to the white people, they were being treated separately and differently. They were not allowed to eat in the same restaurants, drink from the same fountain, go to the same schools, go to the same restaurant, go to the same hotels, or be seen together in public. Even parks and cinemas and other places were segregated, and places that were reserved for Black people, the places that the Black people were supposed to go to, were significantly in a terrible shape compared to the places that the white people had access to, and the Black people were being denied access to. So you see that the Black people are getting second-rate services in any case, in their education, in the places that they eat, in parks, in the water that they're drinking, in the clothes that they wear, in the hotels that they go to. They are getting second-rate service. They are being seen as inferior to these white people. While in the case of the AIDS crisis, the people are being treated unfairly, as in they're not being taken seriously at all. And you can see this from many examples. You can see this in the manner that the Reagan administration was treating this AIDS crisis at the beginning. In fact, there was no actual official action that was taken by the government, by the Reagan administration, until 1989, this crisis began in 1981. There was an 8-year gap before the Reagan administration decided to even take any sort of action against the AIDS crisis. They disregarded this as a gay people issue and let these people to suffer. And In fact, maybe if the Reagan administration took action earlier, maybe there wouldn't have been as many deaths as there had been. Maybe there would have been less. Maybe there would have been better research and more people would have been saved. And in this case, since they were being treated unfairly, they again had to step up like the black people did. In both cases, the minorities or the group that was being treated unfairly, and people in the American public who saw that this was wrong, people like white people in the civil rights movement who saw that the manner that in which black people were being treated was wrong, decided to stand up for the black people, decided to take a stand against the government and fight for the rights that these black people truly deserved and were being denied of simply because of the color of their skin. While in the AIDS crisis, people who were straight people who were not affected by the AIDS crisis or took a stand against the government and decided to fight for these people as well. So those are the similarities that you can see between the civil rights movement and the AIDS crisis. Then moving on to comparisons between the Vietnam War and the AIDS crisis. So the Vietnam War began in 1955 and ended in 1975. So this war was one of the many wars, many incidents that resulted from the Cold War between Russia and America. So this war was between North and South Vietnam, and Russia was supporting North Vietnam and America was supporting South Vietnam. America was trying to turn Vietnam into a capitalist country while Russia was trying to turn it into a communist one. So during this war, in order to make sure that South Vietnam won and Vietnam, the new country, became capitalist, America spent many resources, time, energy, and strategies, and even sent American men to help with the efforts. And in order to ensure that Vietnam would become a capitalist country. And due to this, there was the American public did not like this, because during this war between North and South Vietnam, there were casualties on both sides. There were a larger number of casualties on North Vietnam side in the number of people who died, but they were prepared for it because they were fighting for their freedom. They wanted their country to be communist, and they knew that it would take a lot of work and a lot of sacrifices, and they did not mind or did not care that they were dying. They knew that they were going to create a communist Vietnam. While the American people, on the other hand, they did not share same views as these North Vietnamese people. American people did not see the point in fighting for a war that was not necessarily affecting them in any manner directly. It was only indirectly affecting them. They did not see the point in America wasting its resources on this war, and they did not see the point in all of the men who were losing their lives. And though the casualties on the American side were not as high as the ones in North Vietnam, as the American people had no reason to support this war. They had no direct motivation factor. They did not see the point in their brothers, sons, and fathers losing their lives over something like this. The American people expressed their displeasure against their displeasure with the manner in which the government was helping with the Vietnam War and providing so many resources and sending out soldiers continuously. Uh, and they expressed this through protests and eventually with the internal pressure and the fact that they were losing this war, the government finally decided to give up on the war, and they called out their troops from Vietnam. So again, a similarity that you can see is how the people protested when they were displeased with the government and their actions, and they were able to bring about a change. And ultimately, they were successful in their pursuits, and you can see this in the manner that ultimately the government paid attention to the AIDS crisis and took action. And also in the Vietnam War, they finally realized that they weren't going to win. And also the American public was so displeased with the manner that the government was conducting themselves with, they decided to finally pull out. In both cases, victory was ensured to the public after they started protesting and taking action for what they believed in. Another thing that is common between the Vietnam War and the AIDS crisis is that the government seems to not care about the public, about the general public, the people that they were essentially serving in both cases. And during the Vietnam War, they sent out so many people they deployed so many people to South Vietnam, even though they knew that they were losing and it was going to take more than brute force to win. But they continued in their pursuits and continued to take the same action and follow the same route. They did not change their approaches much. They simply decided that, oh yes, if we send out more men, then we'll win. With this type of mentality, they went out and they fought. And even though this mentality resulted in a lot of loss of life, they did not change the method in which they continued to pursue to participate in this war. While in the AIDS crisis, the people who were affected by AIDS were essentially just neglected entirely. And even when the American people started to protest, it took a while for the government to come around and take it seriously. So you see that in both cases, in both events, the government seems to lack this sort of empathy for the people and have an actual connection with the people. They realize, oh, okay, we're working for the people. In both cases, they seem to be focused on issues that are outside of the country. So during the Vietnam War, they were more concerned about Russia taking over and communism spreading outside of Russia. While during the AIDS crisis, the government was more concerned about about Russia. It was more concerned with issues that were outside the country, like the Cold War, which was still going on. So it was still concerned about Russia taking over, and they were less concerned about the AIDS crisis. So you can see over here there were more. In both cases, the government was more interested in affairs outside of the country than the affairs inside the country. So this again is what also caused the neglect, the lack of attention that the government paid to the people inside who were living inside the country. Really shows this. So those were the similarities between the civil rights movement and the AIDS crisis, and then the AIDS crisis and the Vietnam War. So this is where we've reached the end of the presentation. I hope you've learned a lot more about AIDS crisis and about connections between this crisis and the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. Thank you.